All right, we're going to get started. Thank you for joining. This is our first parent counseling training session of the new year, so welcome. Today we're going to be discussing meal times and restricted eating patterns and how to best support our children and students, as they, maybe struggle with trying new foods or maintaining consistent meal times or whatever the issues may be. A lot of things certainly do come up. um, as a reminder, I'm Stephen Emerson. I'm the counselor here, in kind of collaboration with the OT department. They have given me some great information to share with you today. You could certainly reach out to Sam Monahan for more OT specific support, as well as your students, your child's teacher, or any of our senior teachers, our principal Amanda, our the speech providers, whom everyone that works with your child is certainly well equipped to help support, especially when it comes to lunchtime here as well, since that is sort of the meal that we are focused on here at school. But certainly we can all come up with strategies together. All right. So why mealtimes can be so hard. So mealtime challenges are common for children with autism. Difficulties may be related to sensory sensitivities. So this could be texture, smell, color, temperature, anxiety around predictability needs, right? Like, if they like their food a certain way, if one day that food is a little too cold or a little too hot, it certainly can produce some anxiety. Certainly if they're expecting the same kind of meal out of what they like. Past negative experiences with food, right? So, maybe the first time they ever tried, plain grilled chicken, maybe, there was a sauce or a sauce, maybe there was a seasoning that was just a little off, or maybe it was too hot or too cold and they didn't like that. And so now they're sort of associating that with all grilled chicken, or and you can kind of apply that to sort of all kinds of food, right? Um, Feeding struggles. It's important to remember that feeding struggles are not about behavior or defiance, right? Like, I think especially, even with, individuals not on the spectrum, right? Like, food is something that's very personal. It's something that we're putting in our body, and so that's something that we want to be able to enjoy and feel comfortable with. Obviously, outside of even, you know, allergies and such, right? A lot of these things, especially for a lot of the kids here that we work with who can't really communicate, like, if or why they don't like something. It may come out as like a behavior or defiance, but they just may not enjoy the taste of something in particular. And that's okay, right? Maybe they just may not be able to articulate it the way that, you or I might. And that's totally okay. And the idea is that we're going to give them tools to express that dissatisfaction with a particular food. So picky eating versus feeding aversions. So picky eating, right? So those are the preferences. I don't like this. I like this. I love that. I really don't like that. I might prefer something salty, but I'll eat sweet if I have to, or savory, right? So like we're gonna have preferences, and we might even rank them, right? And that's okay, right? So that's also might be something that we help our children communicate. I'll have some ABA strategies a little bit later on in the presentation, but maybe helping our kids make lists, ranked lists of things that they prefer, right? Like, number one, they might put up there. What's a common one? Chicken nuggets, right? That's my son was on the chicken nuggets, still is kind of. He's kind of off of it now a little bit, but he's getting a little bored with them. But that was all he would eat. So they might put their super favorites up there, right? Their chicken nuggets, their mac and cheese. They're not always the healthiest foods, right? But that's okay, right? Our favorite foods aren't always going to be the healthiest either. As long as they're eating something, right? We want them to be able to eat. Um, so picky eating, right? All these preferences, ranking, versus feeding a aversion, right? So a strong reaction to a specific food characteristic, right? So this may be a really strong dislike for food that is cold or food that has a slippery, slimy texture, right? Like a lot of kids don't like, like my son, he still sort of prefers, dry, crunchy foods. He's gotten better at exploring and trying new things, but really for the longest time was just dry, crunchy, really tan beige food, right? Sort of where your nuggets come in, your graham crackers, um, so like anything like mushy, I get his hands on, just it was, he just kind of got grossed out by it. But he's gotten better, and that comes with exposure and encouragement and making it fun. Um, so those certain characteristics, right? Texture, taste, smell, refusal of entire food groups, right? Like I'm not going to touch any fruits or any vegetables or any kind of beans or any, right? So like we're going to clump certain things all together, right? Kids especially, right, are going to be a little more simplistic, right? So they're going to put a lot of these common traits, so they may not think of it in terms of like fruit, vegetables, meat, um, grains, breads, right? They're not going to look at it like in terms of like the food pyramid, but they might associate like dry or red or green, right? So color, texture, right? So they're going to clump a lot of those categories into their own little food groups, right? Those characteristics might become their own way of discriminating against certain foods, right? And so there also might be like distress, gagging, avoidance, right? So this is going to be how they're going to have that really strong aversion, right? So they may not, just because they're not going to naturally go for maybe the broccoli on the plate, it doesn't mean they necessarily don't like it or are averted to it. That could just be a preference. So it's worth exploring. Just always have that broccoli, those carrots, whatever, have that around. Let them play with it. Have that exposure to it. But um, you know, distress is like if they see that on their plate, they're gonna freak out, right? So that's really where we're heading into like aversion territory, right? Where it almost feels like a fear, right? So when to seek extra support, right? So obviously your first point of contact, your child's doctor, right? You're the pediatrician, right? Nutrition, growth, right? How is that being affected? Meal times, right? It could be super stressful. Maybe they're causing meltdowns, tantrums, a lot of other kind of behaviors. So let's get to the root cause of that. So starting with the pediatrician is always a great first step. And then the feeding team, right? This may include, right, of course, the pediatrician, but then, your speech language pathologist, the OT, a dietitian, a psychologist, social worker, counselor. Like I said, like I included a lot of us here at the school too, right? We're here during food, like lunchtime at least, right? So that's an opportunity for us to also partner with you and being consistent and helping and encourage and introduce things, and you can work with the teachers, the TAs, the one-to-ones, right? The nurse. So a lot of us here are to help support. So sensory factors, right? Of course, not every child on the spectrum is going to have intense sensory factors, right? But it is very common, for sure. So, like I was saying, this could be texture, crunchy, mushy, mixed texture, color. Like I said, like only beige foods, right? My son really into just like no colors. Um, Again, getting better, right? So there's hope always, but it can be very stressful. And we sometimes we forget to think of that light at the end of the tunnel there, right? So smell, taste, size or shape could matter, right? If they see like a big, they might be afraid to take a bite of a big piece of food, right? They're like, oh no, I'm gonna choke on this, or like, it could be intimidating, right? So maybe we want to chop things up a little bit smaller if it seems like they're avoiding bigger foods, or especially when children are like little. My pediatrician for my son recommended the baby led feeding, right? It's sort of like when you give the child bigger pieces, and sort of they just kind of teach themselves to feed on certain things. So like letting them sort of just take charge and give them a bunch of things to just try and just sort of see what they gravitate towards. Um, it's like because yeah, I think we kind of we get so stressed about picking like whatever, like three solid things, right? We want to hit all the food groups, but just kind of like make it fun, right? put a bunch of things on the plate, see what they gravitate towards. Right, but a lot of these things can be sensory factors, right? Size, shape, smell, color, texture. So sensory factors that might impact eating. So traditional. Oh, sorry, the title is wrong on this slide. Traditional table manners can increase stress, right? So like a lot of times for mealtime, right, we focus on like, okay, we're gonna sit in our specific chair. We're going to, sit down for an allotted amount of time, right? We can't get up. We have to say, excuse me, right? A lot of these very traditional table manners, right? When you're at home, really trying to get your child to just eat something so that way they you're less you're not as worried about getting their nutrition. um well, let's not focus too much on sort of the perfect table manners, right? So progress is more important than perfection, right? Did they sit a little bit longer, like, so maybe they sat at the table 2 minutes instead of 1 minute, right? That's fine. It's better. It's progress, right? So maybe the next week we'll aim for 3 minutes, right? And that's okay, right? And maybe you're not even at minutes. Maybe we're at seconds. It's all right. Don't we don't want to stress. Again, progress. And when you're in the middle of it all, it's easy to forget. And we kind of clump all of it. Like, oh, we didn't get that 5-10 minutes of table time. It was a failure. Well, no, maybe you didn't get the 5 minutes, but you got 2 minutes, which was more than the 1 minute from yesterday, right? So you got to really celebrate the successes. When you celebrate the small successes, your child's going to see that, and they're going to celebrate the small successes. Um, Exploration, again, more important than consumption, right? Or it can be, right? Let's celebrate that. Oh, did they smell the food that was on their plate? All right, well, it's better than throwing it to the floor, right? Or just like sitting or walking to the garbage and throwing it out, right? Do they sort of like explore it? Do they even try it, right? Like that would be huge, right? Do they even just like taste it? We're gonna get to the one bite rule, right? You got to just give it one bite. That's the rule, right? Like bare minimum, right? You get there eventually, but right. So exploration versus like how much food do they eat, right? Do they actually explore the plate, the beverages, whatever, right? Do they kind of test things out? That's amazing. That's worth celebrating. And then comfort versus compliance, right? So letting go of the rigid expectations, right? Like our children, it's funny. It's like they could have rigid expectations, but I also sometimes wonder how much of that is because we put the rigid expectations on them, right? And the flexibility sort of becomes an issue, um, right? So let's not be rigid, um, if we can, right? Especially early exploration, right? Let them be comfortable. Let's get rid of like the rigid expectations of like what does success mean here. Um, but then, as they start to explore it, you can kind of maybe make it fun and make some rules around like, okay, maybe they're going to earn things. If they try a new food, maybe they'll earn something, right? And then we can kind of get into some of that like ABA type stuff. All right. Yeah, playing with food, right? So we're going to get into some of that exploration piece, right? So introducing foods outside of mealtime, right? So touch, smash, paint, build, sort food, right? Use food in art or play activities. It can feel wasteful, but maybe just like you get like say you get like a bag of apples, right? Use one apple for a craft. It's actually kind of fun. We like have them like open the apple, show them like what the core of the apple looks like, the seeds, like make it fun, teach them like the parts of the apple. I've seen people like paint, like cut the apple in half, and then you could do like an apple print, and you could paint with it. Um, Obviously you don't want to eat the food if there's paint on it. But you could do some other kinds of crafts. Like you could do like like doing like an edible arrangement could be kind of fun. Get a bunch of fruit and like make flowers like with like toothpicks and and then you can still eat it, right? Make it pretty, like a homemade edible arrangement. That kind of be fun. Sorting the food, right? Make a game out of it. Like, okay, can we count the grapes? Can we sort the grapes and the other berries and whatever. Whatever it might be. Have them help with the groceries. To whatever extent that they can, right? Maybe you have a bag of groceries at home and you have to empty it. And they can kind of help you. Maybe there's a spot for everything in the kitchen, right? And they can kind of help you sort it out and make it less of a chore and maybe make it a game, right? Like a point for every item that you can find in its place, right? So anyway, incorporating food in different ways. This might build familiarity without the pressure to eat the food, right? So food is part of life. It's going to be around us, right? So rather than it feeling so stressful around mealtime, right? Like we're just going to see food all the time around us, right? Not having to clear the plate. So, this could be like the one bite rule, which I think gets mentioned again on another slide. But, starting with small, realistic goals, right? Two bites, one taste, one interaction with that food. Maybe that's a smell, a touch. Stop once the goal is met. Don't push them to keep going. Now, if they decide, like, hey, all right, two bites of this new thing, and I like it. They're gonna go for that third. Right, you don't have to stop them. Obviously let them go for that other bite. Um, but you don't have to keep pushing, right? Praise over the effort, not the amount, right? So great job for taking those two bites. Amazing. And then that's so like, you know, or a good time, or like if they don't get those two bites, right? Like, rather than making them feel disappointed that they didn't do the two bites or making them think that you're disappointed in them, right? Be like, oh, you did one. That's great. Maybe next time we could do two, but you did one and that's awesome. You tried. I'm proud of you for trying, right? So a lot of that, like, praise the trying. Um, we don't want them to feel bad that they didn't meet those expectations. Um, because then, if they feel like they've made you proud for trying, then they're going to want to try again and maybe do even better, right? And hopefully they'll be proud of themselves. As with anything, right? It's going to take time. So this will build trust, and positive mealtime experiences, right? Maybe make it a little less scary, if it's so stressful to meet expectations. Using preferred foods strategically. So this is something that I'm even struggling with my son to figure out how to do. So favorite foods, right? They can increase the motivation, reduce anxiety, help children stay at the table, right? But treats can be intermittent rewards, right? So included early in meals to get started. This is a tool, not a failure. So like having the preferred food on the plate with um the food that you're trying to like introduce, right? So an example of this could be um a classic one like vegetables, right? So I want my child to try cooked peas for the first time, right? So maybe I'll have like a couple tablespoons of peas on the plate next to whatever the thing is that they prefer, right? But a smaller portion of that, right? So you don't want them to fill up on the preferred. So maybe it's chicken nuggets, right? So maybe normally they'll eat 8 chicken nuggets, and maybe put 2 chicken nuggets on the plate next to a couple of tablespoons of the peas, right? So they see the chicken nuggets, like, okay, you can start with the chicken nuggets, but if you want more chicken nuggets, let's try the peas, right? And then you can build, right, from there. Now they're really struggling with the peas. It's not a failure. Give them the next chicken nugget, and then encourage them, whatever the next step is, right? So again, it doesn't have to be trying. Maybe it's touching the food, smelling the food, right? So whatever the interaction is that you're looking for, like it could just be whatever the interaction is what you're rewarding. So maybe they're not at eating the peas yet. So the interaction, right? And then eventually the interaction may become eating, right? But it's okay to reward early on, to encourage. Okay, yes, here's the one bite or one try rule, right? The goal is exposure, not eating the whole portion, right? So ultimately, right, like we're building up to biting, trying, honor the agreement, right? So don't watch them take that extra bite and then push them to finish, especially if they don't want to. Celebrate the one bite and then carry that over. Maybe it's a one bite rule for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. That's okay. And then say, can we try 2 bites? If they seem to be stuck, maybe move on to a different food type. Maybe they just don't like that food. And that's okay. But repeated exposure builds um, acceptance over time, right? So don't give it like one day. You want to put those peas on the plate every day for about a month, right? And it could feel like a waste of peas. So that's when you want to get buy it in bulk if you can. Find it on sale, whatever it might be, right? So like finding things that like you can get in big quantities, where it's not going to feel like it's hitting the pocketbook too much. Yeah, right. We're not going to do this with like a really nice cut of steak, right? We'll do this with like healthy foods for sure, right? But you know big quantity foods. Keep offering without the pressure, right? So it may take 10 to 15 exposures before a food is accepted, right? Like I said, it could be take a couple of weeks of just seeing those peas next to those chicken nuggets, before they eventually try it or accept that, like, okay, peas are part of life now. But give it time. Different versions of the preparation, right? So trying roasted, mashed, sliced, right? So maybe, if we're going to talk about peas, right? So it could be peas with butter, salt, plain peas, mashed peas. Um, it could be boiled, baked, right? Different versions, different forms. So rice versus whole vegetables. So you could do, yeah, like different, like how would the vegetable look different, right? So cauliflower. Like I've seen riced cauliflower, right, where people they just take it and they kind of like shred it almost like on a cheese grater. Um, it just looks a little different. Might look a little less intimidating. They could eat, if it's riced cauliflower, they could scoop it with a spoon. Maybe that'll be less, than having to cut it themselves. Yeah, yeah, because sometimes right, a big part of this is just figuring out if like the texture's the problem. Right? Make food fun and predictable, right? So you could be silly with it. You can call broccoli green alien trees. Right? Be creative. Ants on a log. Get your celery with the peanut butter and the raisins, right? Kind of that. Make it fun, make it silly. Take different things, make fun snacks. Have them help you make things. Use visual routines, predictable structure. You'll start to see some like ABA stuff with it. Have meal times as part of like the calendar, the schedule. Um, so they can expect like, okay, I'm going to wake up in the morning. I'm going to have my breakfast. I'm going to go to school. I'm going to go to school. I'm going to have my snack or my lunchtime. Come back. Maybe I'll have a snack after school, dinner time, and then maybe snack or dessert later on. Right? Right, that predictability is going to help reduce the surprises and reduce anxiety. Maybe you want to plan, as much as you can, plan out the menu, right? So this week, Tuesday we're going to do chicken. Wednesday we're going to do pasta. Thursday we're going to do pork or whatever. And then you could pick the vegetable for each day. Have them pick, out certain things. Like what vegetable do you want today? Maybe you want to do like a vegetable, a meat, right, a carb, right? And you could say like, okay, are we gonna do rice? Are we gonna do pasta? Are we gonna do chicken or beef? Or right? Have them kind of help you pick out the menu. That could be fun. So incorporating some of the ABA stuff, right? Showing how to interact with food, so modeling, right? Talk through like biting, chewing, tasting, like showing them, how do we eat? Prompting, right? Verbal, right? Let's try one bite. Gestural, pointing, visual, pictures or schedules, like we were just saying, and then fading out. So gradually reducing the prompts to build that independence around those eating skills. If you actually look at some of the older trainings we did earlier in the school year, and then also a lot that we did last spring. They're still up on the website. I think if you go to the Hawthorne Country Day website, if you go to it's like the About Me, About Us section. I think the training's in there. I can put up the link in the next email. Actually, I'll have everyone send out an email to parents, see where you could find all these recordings because they are helpful to go through the older ones. Reinforcement. as well, in addition to the other ABA strategies, right? So again, positive reinforcement, praising, using the preferred foods or activities, the one bite rule, right? Like, all right, you gave us one bite, you tried this thing, all right, you can get your favorite food, or you can get, have more time on, um, that toy or that video game or tablet or TV or whatever. Exposure over time, not the volume, right? So, put a few tablespoons of those peas on that plate every day. It's about the exposure, the time spent with it versus, all right, they didn't eat the 3 tablespoons, but maybe they'll get there. Hopefully within 2, 3, could happen in 4 weeks, right? Um, Caregivers follow through consistently, right? So using repetition, building that, the learning over time, right? 10 to 15 exposures, for example, might be needed. Timing and environment. So that matters, right? Schedule meals when your child is most regulated, not overtired or overwhelmed. It's very hard to do new things when we're tired, stressed, overwhelmed, right? So, when they're calm and regulated, just that calm environment helps support better eating outcomes. I know when I'm stressed, my eating actually habits are very different, right? Something for a lot of us adults, right? We stress eat, or maybe we don't eat as much, right? A lot of us are very, sometimes we're different, right? If we stress, maybe we don't pick the best foods. We pick those comfort foods, and that's sort of like a very different eating routine, right? That changes, or we forget to eat, or we don't eat as much because we're stressed. We're not, really, So yeah, I mean, it's different based on the person, but we can even see for us, those things can affect our eating. I brought up the school lunch. Have your child pick out what they would like to eat at school, or have them help you pack the lunch, if they don't receive the school lunch. If they receive the school lunch, I think you guys should have the menu ahead of time. Are you excited for that pasta or that chicken that you guys, or that pizza you guys are going to have at lunch today? Have that menu or that schedule printed out, maybe with some pictures, so they can look forward to the school lunch and know that it's coming. And then maybe you guys can try if you know that there's a school lunch that kind of gets repeated often. Like I know they do like Pizza Fridays or whatever it is they do. You could certainly try to do those at home, and so you get some of that consistency. Or if you want your child to eat food that they've brought, you know, we'll certainly mirror the encouragement and the strategies here, that you would be implementing at home. Um, and repetition is okay if nutrition is balanced, right? So lunch is social and sensory. So keep expectations realistic, right? So if they're eating the same thing every day, that's fine. That's fine. As long as they're getting the nutrition, that they need. I think that's the big worry, right? With picky eaters or people, or kids who are refusing to eat certain things. Are they getting the nutrition that they need? There's a lot. You can obviously speak with, your child's doctor if they recommend any particular, supplements. But I know there's one, I forget the name of the brand, but for my son, we just started implementing, I think it's Ella Ola. Um, Not that I'm recommending, again, always talk to your doctor, if something's right for your child. Um, but yeah, there's a bunch of supplements that you can include that are textureless, flavorless, um, that you could put in the food that they will eat, just to help, give you some peace of mind. Final takeaways, right? So you're not alone, right? So mealtimes, mealtime struggles are very common. Take those small steps, celebrate the small successes. Reducing stress improves eating over time. So take away the stress as much as you can for yourself and your child. Focus on trust, the exposure to the food, and the emotional safety versus just the eating, right? Make it less about the eating. Ultimately, it's about them eating the food, right? But make it about the journey, the process, building that excitement around it, and then eventually you'll get to that end goal. And that's it. for our that's all we have for you on mealtime and food aversion. For your information here, we have Jim, the senior teacher's info. My contact is here as well. Um, you know, I so eating and mealtime isn't my particular expertise. So that's why I went to the OT department to give me some great information, which I've included in the slide. And Sam Monahan, who's the head of the related services, she started off as just OT, and so now she's doing both. Um, she gave me some great information that I'm going to put up along the recorded video here as well. Alrighty, so thank you all for joining this training, and we hope to see you next month for our next session. All right, take care and have a great rest of your week.